Bring her in. Let's expose her failure, Victor Hayes hissed, his voice slicing through the buzz of Silicon Valley's elite at the Global Tech Summit. The chandeliers gleamed over marble floors, but his eyes burned with malice. He'd invited Sabrina Wells, his discarded ex-wife, to parade her ruin before America's tech titans. Yet Sabrina held a secret power he couldn't fathom. The grand doors swung open. Sabrina stepped through the center, her off-shoulder pink gown shimmering under chandeliers, long, sleek hair cascading like a crown. Cameras flashed, reporters gasped. Sabrina Wells? To her right, Victor and Nadia froze, mouths agape as she glided in like a queen, her presence commanding. Victor forced a smile, voice shaky. You came. Sabrina locked eyes, unflinching. I don't need your stage to shine. Nadia recoiled, stunned by her confidence. The room hummed, sensing war. What power does she wield? Will Victor's pride survive her truth? Vote 1 if this grips you, 0 if it doesn't. Stay. Her story will stun you. Victor Hayes stood on the balcony of his San Francisco penthouse, the city's skyline sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom. The glass in his hand caught the dying light, whiskey swirling as his lips curled into a smirk. She'll crawl back, he murmured, his voice thick with disdain. Sabrina always does. His heart pulsed with a cruel certainty, a thrill at the thought of his ex-wife's humiliation. He'd built Apex Ventures into a titan of Silicon Valley, and tonight he'd ensure the world knew he'd left her behind, a relic of a past he'd outgrown. The invitation he'd sent her burned in his mind, a gilded trap to parade her failure at the Global Tech Summit. To Victor, Sabrina was nothing but a shadow, a woman whose blackness had been twisted into a reason she didn't belong in his glittering world. The thought of her shame sent a surge of triumph through him, warming his chest more than the liquor. Below, the city hummed with ambition, but Victor's thoughts were consumed by control. He'd always thrived on it. Control over his empire, his image, his narrative. Sabrina had once been part of that narrative, her quiet brilliance steadying his reckless dreams. But she'd been too soft, too steady, not the dazzling partner he needed to shine. Nadia Klein was that partner now. She glided into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her presence as polished as the diamonds at her throat. You're obsessing again, she said, her voice a velvet blade, her eyes narrowing as she joined him on the balcony. Sabrina's nothing. Why waste your energy? Victor's smirk widened, but a flicker of unease stirred in his gut. It's not obsession, he said, his tone sharp. It's strategy. Showing her to the world as a failure proves I've moved up. Apex deserves that spotlight. Nadia tilted her head, her gaze calculating. You're playing a dangerous game, Victor. She's not the type to break quietly. Her words carried a warning, but Victor laughed, the sound harsh against the evening air. Break? I shattered her years ago. She's got nothing left. Yet as he spoke, a shadow of doubt crept into his chest, unbidden, like a crack in his flawless facade. He pushed it down, drowning it in another sip of whiskey. Nadia watched him, her fingers tightening around her glass. She felt the weight of his arrogance, a weight she'd learned to wield for her own gain. But something about Sabrina's name unsettled her, a ghost from Victor's past that refused to stay buried. Across the city, in a sleek apartment perched above the Mission District, Sabrina Wells stood before a floor-length mirror, her fingers tracing the edge of a silver envelope. Victor's handwriting stared back, each letter a dagger. Sabrina, join us. Her heart clenched, not with fear, but with a fire that had been smoldering for years. The woman in the reflection was no longer the one who'd wept under Victor's cruelty. That Sabrina had crumbled when he tossed divorce papers across their kitchen table, his voice like ice. You're holding me back. Nadia elevates me. The memory seared her, but it no longer drew tears. It fueled her. Her dark eyes burned with resolve, her jaw set with a quiet strength that had grown in the shadows of betrayal. She'd loved Victor once, poured her soul into his dreams. She'd balanced his books, refined his pitches, stood by him when Apex was just a spark. But he'd seen her as a tool, not a partner. "You don't belong in this world," he'd said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. The media had echoed him, their headlines vicious. Victor Hayes soars, ex-wife fades. Her blackness had been weaponized, twisted into proof she couldn't match his shine. The pain had nearly drowned her, but Sabrina had clawed her way out, each wound forging her into something unbreakable. She set the envelope down, her fingers steady, her heart a drumbeat of purpose. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the past. Kira's name flashed on the screen, her message sharp. "Don't let him drag you back, Sabrina. He's not worth it." Kira, her fiercest ally, had been the first to see her potential when the world had turned away. They'd met in a cramped co-working space, Kira's quick wit and bold vision sparking an instant bond. "You're not just good," Kira had said, watching Sabrina unravel a financial mess for a struggling startup. "You're unstoppable." Together, they'd built a venture that now rivaled Apex, a silent empire Victor couldn't touch. Sabrina typed back, her fingers swift. "He won't drag me down. I'm coming for him." Kira's reply was instant. "Then make him regret it." Sabrina's lips curved into a faint smile, a flicker of defiance lighting her eyes. She wasn't the woman who'd signed those divorce papers, her hands trembling with grief. She was a force now, her pain transformed into power. The gown she'd chosen for the summit, a pink off-shoulder masterpiece, hung in her closet. A promise of the moment she'd step into his world and shatter his illusions. She wouldn't scream or beg. Her victory would be quiet, devastating, undeniable. Back at the penthouse, Victor paced, his confidence a mask over a growing unease. He'd built Apex into a powerhouse, but the summit was more than a stage. It was a battlefield. Rivals circled, investors watched, and he needed to prove his dominance. Inviting Sabrina was his trump card, a way to show the world he'd transcended his past. "She'll be a spectacle," he told Nadia, his voice firm but edged with something unsteady. "A reminder of where I started and how far I've come." Nadia's smile was tight, her eyes scanning him for cracks. "Just make sure she doesn't surprise you," she said, her tone light but laced with warning. Victor's laugh was forced, his chest tightening. "Surprise me? She's got nothing." But Sabrina had everything. She'd spent years in the shadows, rebuilding herself piece by piece. Her freelance gigs had grown into partnerships, her late nights into a network that spanned the industry. Kira had been her spark, but Sabrina had been the fire, turning their venture into a force that whispered through boardrooms Victor couldn't enter. She'd kept her name hidden, letting Kira take the spotlight while she pulled the strings. It was a strategy born of survival, but also of brilliance, a brilliance Victor had never seen. As the city lights glittered below, Victor raised his glass, toasting his own triumph. "To Apex," he said, his voice echoing with certainty, "and to burying the past." Nadia clinked her glass against his, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt. Sabrina's name lingered between them, a shadow neither could shake. Across town, Sabrina slipped the invitation into her purse, her heart steady, her resolve unbreakable. She wasn't coming to the summit to beg or break. She was coming to win. Sabrina Wells stood motionless in her apartment, the silver invitation from Victor still clutched in her hand, its edges sharp against her fingers. The city's pulse thrummed outside her window, but inside, her heart was a battlefield, rage warring with resolve, pain clashing with defiance. The words Victor had scrawled, "Sabrina, join us," weren't just an invitation. They were a taunt, a reminder of the life he'd torn from her. Her chest tightened as memories flooded back, each one a shard of glass. She'd given him everything, her mind, her heart, her nights spent turning his half-baked ideas into reality. And he'd repaid her with betrayal, casting her aside like a worn-out tool. "You're holding me back," he'd said, his voice cold as he slid divorce papers across their kitchen table. The memory burned, but Sabrina's eyes were dry. She wasn't that woman anymore. The fire in her had forged something new, something unbreakable. She set the invitation down, her fingers trembling not with fear but with purpose. The apartment, modest but hers, was a sanctuary she'd built from the wreckage of her past. Every corner held echoes of her fight, stacks of financial ledgers, a laptop glowing with spreadsheets, a vision board pinned with dreams she dared to chase again. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Jamal's name flashed on the screen, her brother's voice a reluctant anchor to a family that had turned its back. "Sabrina, don't do this," he said, his tone heavy with judgment. Victor's moved on. "You're dragging our name through the mud by clinging to him." Her throat tightened, his words a fresh wound. "Clinging," she whispered, her voice low but fierce. "He stole my work, Jamal, my dreams. And you're worried about his name?" Jamal sighed, his frustration palpable. "You're making it worse. The media's already tearing you apart. Let it go." Sabrina's grip on the phone tightened, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You let me go, Jamal," she said, her voice cracking. "When they called me a failure, when they said I didn't belong because of my skin, where were you?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and accusing. "I'm trying to protect you," he said finally, but the words rang hollow. "Protect yourself," Sabrina snapped, ending the call. Her chest heaved, the sting of his abandonment cutting deep, but she wouldn't break. Not again. Across town, Victor leaned back in his leather chair, the city's skyline a glittering backdrop to his smug satisfaction. The penthouse was a monument to his success, every sleek surface a testament to his rise. Nadia perched on the armrest, her presence a calculated display of allure, her eyes scanning him with a mix of admiration and unease. "You're sure about this Sabrina thing?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with doubt. Victor's smile was a blade, sharp and unyielding. "Absolutely," he said, his tone dripping with confidence. "She's a ghost now. Inviting her to the summit is just icing. It shows the world I've left her behind, that Apex is untouchable." His heart swelled with the thrill of control, the anticipation of seeing Sabrina crumble under the weight of his triumph. Nadia's lips curved, but her eyes flickered with something darker. Jealousy, perhaps, or fear. "She was your wife, Victor. People don't forget that easily." His jaw tightened, a spark of irritation flaring in his chest. "They will when they see her," he said, his voice low. "Broken, irrelevant, a black woman who couldn't keep up with me." The words were cruel, but they fueled him, feeding the ego that had carried him to the top. Yet Nadia's unease lingered, a subtle crack in their shared confidence. She'd climbed beside him, her beauty and charm a perfect accessory, but Sabrina's name stirred something she couldn't name, a threat she couldn't dismiss. Sabrina paced her apartment, the invitation now await on her desk, a challenge she refused to ignore. She closed her eyes, letting the memories surge. The nights she'd spent balancing Victor's books, crafting strategies while he slept, believing they were building a future together. She'd been his foundation, her brilliance the unseen force behind Apex's early success. But the world had only seen him, his name splashed across headlines while hers was erased. "She doesn't belong," the articles had sneered, their words laced with venom, her blackness twisted into a flaw. The pain had been a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. But Sabrina had fought back, her tears drying into resolve, her heartbreak forging a new path. Her phone buzzed again, this time with Kira's name. "You okay?" Kira's voice was a lifeline, warm and fierce, pulling Sabrina from the abyss. "He's trying to bury me again," Sabrina said, her voice steady but laced with fire. "That invitation, it's a trap." Kira's laugh was sharp, defiant. "Then spring it on him. You're not the woman he left, Sabrina. You're a damn force." Sabrina's heart lifted, Kira's words a spark igniting her courage. They'd met in a co-working space, two women bound by ambition and a refusal to be overlooked. Kira had seen her talent, her worth, when the world had turned away. Together they'd built a venture that now rivaled Apex, a secret empire born from a Sabrina's pain. "I'm not going to the summit to beg," Sabrina said, her voice hardening. "I'm going to win." Kira's grin was audible through the phone. "That's my girl. Show him what he lost." Sabrina hung up, her eyes drifting to the closet where her pink off-shoulder gown hung, a symbol of the woman she'd become. She wasn't the broken wife Victor had discarded. She was a storm, gathering strength, her heart a furnace of determination. The media had called her a failure, Her brother had turned away, but Sabrina had rebuilt herself piece by piece in the shadows. Victor, meanwhile, stood before a mirror, adjusting his tie, his reflection radiating power. But beneath the surface, a flicker of doubt stirred. Sabrina's name, once a footnote, now felt like a weight. She's nothing, he told himself, his voice firm but hollow. He'd buried her once, hadn't he? Yet the invitation he'd sent felt like a gamble, a move he couldn't fully control. Nadia watched him, her silence heavy. "You're playing with fire," she said softly, her eyes searching his. Victor's smile was forced, his heart racing with a mix of arrogance and unease. "Fire? I'm the flame, Nadia. She's just ash." But Sabrina was no ash. She was a phoenix, rising from the ruins of his betrayal. Her fingers brushed the invitation one last time, her resolve a blade honed by years of pain. She'd face Victor's world, not as his victim, but as his reckoning. The summit loomed, a stage set for her triumph. She wasn't ready to reveal her hand, not yet. But when she did, Victor would learn the cost of underestimating her. Sabrina Wells sat at her desk, the silver invitation now a quiet sentinel among her scattered ledgers. Her heart thrummed with a restless energy, a mix of defiance and lingering pain that pulsed through her veins. The call from Jamal still echoed, his words a fresh scar. "You're dragging our name through the mud." Her brother's betrayal stung deeper than Victor's, a wound that cut to her core. She'd spent years believing family would stand by her, even when the world turned its back. But Jamal's voice had been cold, his loyalty swayed by Victor's glittering success. Sabrina's fingers tightened around a pen, her jaw set as she pushed the hurt down. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here to rebuild, to prove them all wrong. Not with tears, but with a strength they'd never seen. She rose, pacing the small office she'd carved out in her apartment, its walls lined with notes and dreams. The space was her fortress, a testament to the woman she'd become. Once she'd poured her soul into Victor's ventures, her brilliance the unseen foundation of his empire. Now she was building her own, and it was stronger than he could ever imagine. Her phone buzzed, Kira's name flashing like a beacon. "You still stewing over Jamal?" Kira's voice was sharp, laced with the kind of fire that had drawn Sabrina to her. "He's not worth it, Sabrina. You're bigger than his doubts." Sabrina's lips curved, a flicker of warmth easing the ache in her chest. "I know," she said softly, her voice steady but raw. "But it hurts. He was supposed to be my family." Kira's sigh was heavy, tinged with empathy. "Family doesn't always see you, but I do. You're a damn warrior, and Victor's about to find out." Sabrina's heart lifted, Kira's words a lifeline pulling her from the shadows of betrayal. They'd met in a gritty co-working space, two women bound by ambition and a refusal to be ignored. Kira had seen her talent when Sabrina was still raw from Victor's rejection, her confidence battered by headlines that sneered at her blackness. "You're not just good," Kira had said, her eyes blazing as Sabrina untangled a startup's financial chaos. "You're unstoppable." That moment had sparked something in Sabrina, a belief she'd thought Victor had stolen. She turned to the window, the city's lights a glittering reminder of the world she was reclaiming. Her venture with Kira, Novapulse, was no longer a dream. It was a reality, a silent force growing in the underbelly of Silicon Valley. They'd started small, taking on clients no one else wanted, turning failing startups into successes. Sabrina had worked in the shadows, her name absent from the spotlight, Kira commanded with ease. It was a choice, not a retreat, a strategy to build without the weight of her past. A wealthy investor, introduced by Kira, had seen their potential and poured funds into Novapulse, giving it the fuel to soar. Sabrina's heart raced at the thought, a mix of pride and anticipation. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Across town, Victor lounged in a private club, the air thick with cigar smoke and the low hum of power. His laughter rang out, a calculated performance for the investors at his table. "Apex is untouchable," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. "And when Sabrina shows up at the summit, you'll see why I left her behind." His heart swelled with the thrill of control, the certainty that he'd scripted her downfall. But beneath his bravado, a splinter of doubt lodged itself, sharp and unyielding. He'd buried Sabrina once, hadn't he? Yet her name felt heavier now, a whisper he couldn't silence. Nadia sat beside him, her smile a perfect mask, but her fingers drummed restlessly on the table. "You keep talking about her," she said, her tone light but edged with irritation. "Why does she matter so much?" Victor's jaw tightened, his heart skipping a beat. "She doesn't," he snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. "She's just a prop, Nadia, a way to show the world I've won." But Nadia's eyes narrowed, her intuition catching the crack in his armor. "Props don't haunt you, Victor," she said softly, her words slicing through his confidence. "You're not as sure as you think." Victor forced a laugh, but it rang hollow, his chest tightening with a fear he refused to name. Sabrina, meanwhile, sat back at her desk, her fingers tracing the edges of a business plan she'd poured her soul into. Novapulse wasn't just a company, it was her redemption, a testament to the woman she'd become. She'd faced rejection after rejection in those early days, her blackness a silent barrier in rooms full of skeptical faces. "You're Victor's ex?" one client had sneered, his tone dripping with dismissal. "What could you possibly offer?" Sabrina had swallowed the sting, her voice steady as she'd proven him wrong, turning his failing venture into a success. Each win had built her confidence, each client a brick in her empire. Her heart pounded with a fierce pride, a fire that burned brighter with every doubt she'd silenced. Kira's voice echoed in her mind. "You're unstoppable." Sabrina clung to those words, her resolve hardening. She wasn't the woman who'd wept when Victor walked away, or when Jamal turned his back. She was a force now, her pain a forge that had shaped her into something extraordinary. The invitation from Victor sat on her desk, a challenge she'd meet on her terms. She wouldn't go to the summit to beg or break. She'd go to conquer, her heart a furnace of determination, her spirit unyielding. Victor in the club raised his glass, his smile a mask for the unease creeping into his soul. "To Apex," he said, his voice booming for the investors, "and to leaving the past behind." The men around him cheered, but Nadia's eyes lingered on him, her doubt a quiet storm. She sensed something Victor didn't. A reckoning was coming, carried on the shoulders of a woman he'd underestimated. Sabrina's name was no longer a footnote. It was a promise, one that would soon shake his world. Sabrina stood, her gaze drifting to the closet where her pink off-shoulder gown hung, a symbol of the woman she'd become. She wouldn't fight Victor with words or tears. Her victory would be silent, devastating, a testament to the power he'd never seen. Her heart beat steady, a drum of defiance. The summit was near, but this moment was hers, a moment to claim the strength she'd forged in the ashes of her past. The Global Tech Summit's grand hall pulsed with anticipation, a glittering sea of ambition and power. Sabrina Wells stood just beyond the threshold, her heart a storm of fire and steel. The pink off-shoulder gown clung to her like armor, its fabric catching the light with every breath, her long, sleek hair cascading down her back like a crown. She'd spent years forging herself in the crucible of betrayal, and now Victor's invitation, a cruel summons to her supposed ruin, felt like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with a fierce resolve that burned brighter than the chandeliers above. She wasn't here to beg or break. She was here to claim her place, to let the world see the woman Victor had tried to erase. Her fingers brushed the gown, a silent vow. "This is my moment." Inside, Victor Hayes moved through the crowd, his smile a polished blade, his heart thrumming with smug certainty. He'd orchestrated this night to perfection. The summit would crown Apex Ventures as Silicon Valley's titan, and Sabrina's presence would be the final stroke of his triumph. "She'll be a spectacle," he murmured to Nadia, his lover, whose diamond necklace glittered with every calculated tilt of her head. Nadia's eyes flickered with unease, her heart a tangle of confidence and doubt. "You're sure she'll show?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with tension. Victor's laugh was sharp, his chest swelling with arrogance. "She'll come. She can't resist. And when she does, everyone will see her for what she is. Nothing." But beneath his bravado, a splinter of fear lodged in his heart, a whisper that Sabrina wasn't the broken woman he'd left behind. The crowd buzzed, their voices a symphony of greed and ambition, unaware of the storm about to break. Investors in tailored suits clinked glasses, reporters hovered with hungry eyes, and whispers of Sabrina's invitation rippled through the hall. Victor's ex? One sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. She's a nobody now. Another laughed. He's just rubbing it in. Nadia's fingers tightened around her champagne flute, her heart racing with a mix of irritation and unease. She'd built her place beside Victor, her beauty a perfect accessory to his power. But Sabrina's name stirred a shadow she couldn't shake. She's irrelevant, Nadia told herself, but the words felt fragile, her confidence cracking under the weight of an unknown threat. Sabrina took a breath, her heart steadying as she stepped toward the grand doors. Kira's voice echoed in her mind. Show them. Her ally's fierce belief had carried her through the darkest nights, and now it was a torch lighting her path. She'd faced rejection after rejection, her blackness a silent barrier in rooms full of skeptical faces. You're Victor's ex? One investor had scoffed, dismissing her. She'd proven him wrong, her brilliance turning his failing venture into a success. Each victory had fueled her, each doubter a spark in her fire. Now she was ready to face Victor's world, her heart a furnace of defiance. She wasn't the woman he discarded. She was a queen, and this hall would be her court. The grand doors swung open, a hush falling over the crowd. Sabrina Wells stepped through the center, her pink gown shimmering under the chandeliers, her long hair a cascade of power. Cameras flashed, reporters gasped, "Sabrina Wells!" To her right, Victor and Nadia stood frozen, mouths agape, their eyes wide with shock as she glided in like a queen, her presence commanding the room. Sabrina's heart pounded, a mix of pride and adrenaline, but her face was serene, her gaze unflinching. Victor recovered, forcing a smile, his voice trembling. You came. His heart lurched, a flood of doubt crashing through his arrogance. This wasn't the broken woman he'd expected. This was something else, something dangerous. Sabrina locked eyes with him, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. I don't need your stage to shine, Victor. The words landed like a blade, sharp and precise, her heart soaring with the thrill of defiance. The crowd stirred, sensing a shift, their whispers turning to awe. Nadia stepped closer, her smile venomous but faltering, her heart racing with a mix of jealousy and fear. Nice dress, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. Trying to steal the spotlight? Sabrina's eyes flicked to Nadia's gaudy necklace, her tone calm but lethal. I don't steal, I create. The jab struck deep, Nadia's confidence crumbling as the room buzzed with tension. Her heart sank, a realization dawning. Sabrina was no ghost. Victor's chest tightened, his smile a fragile mask. Don't embarrass yourself, he hissed, his voice low, but his heart betrayed him, pounding with a fear he couldn't name. Sabrina's calm unnerved him, her presence a challenge to his carefully crafted narrative. He'd planned to parade her as a failure, but the woman before him was anything but. Her heart burned with a quiet fury, a strength forged in the ashes of his betrayal. She moved through the crowd, shaking hands with investors who paused, their eyes flickering with respect. Victor watched, his arrogance cracking, a storm of doubt swirling in his chest. She's bluffing, he told himself, but the words felt hollow, his heart racing with a truth he couldn't face. Nadia clung to his arm, her heart a knot of panic. Why are they looking at her like that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Victor forced a laugh, but it was brittle, his chest tight with unease. She's nothing, he said, but his eyes followed Sabrina, her every step a threat to his control. Sabrina's heart, meanwhile, was a drum of triumph. She wasn't here to beg for scraps. She was here to rewrite her story, to show the world the woman Victor had tried to erase. Her blackness, once a weapon against her, was now her crown, her presence a declaration of power. The hall thrummed with energy, the crowd sensing a war about to erupt. Sabrina stood tall, her heart a beacon of defiance, her gown a symbol of the strength she'd forged. Victor's world was his stage, but she was no longer his pawn. She was a queen, and this moment was hers. Sabrina Wells stood at the edge of the grand hall, her heart a steady drumbeat beneath the shimmering pink gown that clung to her like a second skin. The chandeliers above cast golden light across her long, sleek hair, but it was her presence that held the room, a quiet, unshakable force that seemed to shift the air itself. She'd walked through those doors moments ago, her entrance like a thunderclap, leaving Victor and Nadia reeling in her wake. Now as she moved through the crowd, her heart pulsed with a mix of triumph and tension. Every step was a defiance of the world that had once dismissed her, her blackness twisted into a reason she didn't belong. But Victor's world was no longer his alone. Sabrina felt it in her bones. She was rewriting his stage, and the weight of that power both thrilled and unnerved her. Victor Hayes gripped his champagne flute, his knuckles white, his smile a brittle mask. His heart churned with a storm of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a creeping fear that clawed at his confidence. Sabrina's entrance had been a blow, her poise shattering his carefully crafted narrative. She wasn't the broken relic he'd expected, the woman he'd planned to parade as a failure. Her words, "I don't need your stage to shine," echoed in his mind, each syllable a dagger to his ego. He watched her now, gliding through the crowd, shaking hands with investors who paused, their eyes flickering with respect. His chest tightened, a surge of rage battling the doubt that gnawed at him. "She's bluffing," he muttered, his voice low, but his heart betrayed him, pounding with a truth he couldn't face. Sabrina was no ghost. She was a threat. Nadia stood beside him, her heart a knot of jealousy and panic. Her diamond necklace caught the light, but it felt heavy, a chain anchoring her to Victor's sinking ship. Sabrina's presence was a wildfire, consuming the attention Nadia had worked so hard to claim. "Why are they looking at her like that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. Her eyes followed Sabrina, who spoke quietly with Dr. Lin, a key investor whose nod carried more weight than Victor's entire speech. Nadia's heart sank, her confidence crumbling like sand. She'd built her place beside Victor, her beauty and charm a perfect complement to his power. But Sabrina's quiet strength was unraveling it all. "She's nothing," Nadia told herself. But the words rang hollow, her heart racing with a realization. Sabrina was stealing her spotlight. Sabrina felt the eyes on her, a weight she'd grown accustomed to but never accepted. Her heart thrummed with a mix of pride and apprehension as she exchanged words with Dr. Lin, her voice steady despite the storm within. "I've heard whispers of your work," Dr. Lin said, her tone warm but probing. "You're more than Victor's ex, aren't you?" Sabrina's smile was faint, her heart soaring with a quiet triumph. "I've always been more," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. The investor's nod was subtle, but it sent a ripple through Sabrina's chest, a validation she'd fought for through years of rejection. Her blackness, once a barrier, was now her crown, and she wore it with a defiance that burned bright. Across the room, Victor worked the crowd, his charisma a polished weapon, but his heart was a battlefield. He approached Mr. Sato, a tech titan whose investments could make or break Apex. "We're set to dominate," Victor said, his voice smooth but strained. Mr. Sato's eyes drifted to Sabrina, his nod curt. "We'll see," he said, his tone neutral but heavy with implication. Victor's smile faltered, his heart lurching with a mix of anger and fear. "She's nobody," he told himself, but the words felt like a lie, his chest tightening as Sabrina's presence grew larger. He'd planned to crush her, to show the world his triumph, but her every move was a challenge to his control, a crack in the facade he'd built. Nadia's fingers dug into Victor's arm, her heart pounding with a desperation she couldn't hide. "She's talking to Sato now," she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "Do something, Victor." Her eyes burned with a mix of jealousy and dread, her place beside him suddenly fragile. Victor's jaw clenched, his heart racing with a fury he couldn't contain. "She's playing a game," he snapped, his voice low, "and she'll lose." But his confidence was a thin veil, his heart betraying him with every glance at Sabrina. She wasn't crumbling, she was commanding, her presence a quiet storm that threatened to sweep him away. Sabrina felt the weight of their stares, but her heart remained steady, a beacon of resolve. She moved to another investor, her words measured, her smile a weapon. Each nod, each handshake, was a victory, a reclaiming of the narrative Victor had tried to steal. Her heart swelled with pride, but a whisper of doubt lingered. What if this world, his world, still had the power to wound her? She pushed it down, her resolve hardening. Kira's voice echoed in her mind. You're unstoppable. Her ally's belief was a shield, one she carried as she navigated the crowd, her gown a symbol of the strength she'd forged. Victor watched, his heart a furnace of rage and fear. He'd invited Sabrina to humiliate her, but she was turning his stage against him. She's nothing, he told Nadia, his voice firm but trembling. Nadia's eyes narrowed, her heart a tangle of panic and resentment. Then why are they listening to her? She asked, her voice cutting through his bravado. Victor had no answer, his chest tight with a truth he couldn't face. Sabrina was no longer his pawn. She was a queen, and the hall was her court. Sabrina stood tall, her heart a drum of defiance. She wasn't here to beg or break. She was here to rewrite her story, to show the world the woman Victor had tried to erase. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their eyes shifting from Victor to her, a tide turning in her favor. Her heart burned with a quiet fury, a strength that would soon shake the foundations of his empire. Sabrina Wells stood among the glittering crowd, her heart a furnace of defiance and nerves, the pink off-shoulder gown shimmering like a beacon under the chandeliers. Her long, sleek hair framed her face, a quiet crown for the queen she'd become. The Global Tech Summit's hall thrummed with tension, the air thick with whispers and sidelong glances. Sabrina's presence had shifted the room's gravity, pulling eyes and respect away from Victor. Her heart pounded, a mix of exhilaration and fear, as she felt the weight of every stare. She'd walked into this lion's den, Victor's trap, not as prey but as a predator, her every move a challenge to the man who'd tried to erase her. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a flicker of doubt lingered. What if this world, his world, could still wound her? She pushed it down, her resolve a blade honed by years of pain. Her blackness no longer a barrier, but a source of unbreakable strength. Victor Hayes gripped the edge of a table, his heart a storm of rage and panic, his smile a crumbling facade. Sabrina's entrance had been a blow, her poise and command shattering his plan to parade her as a failure. Now, as she moved through the crowd, investors like Dr. Lin and Mr. Sato leaned toward her, their nods subtle but devastating. His chest tightened, a surge of fury battling the fear that clawed at his core. She's nobody, he whispered to himself, his voice trembling, but the lie tasted bitter. His heart raced with a truth he couldn't face. Sabrina was stealing his stage, his summit, his empire. He'd invited her to humiliate her, but every glance she drew was a dagger to his ego, each handshake a crack in his carefully built world. Nadia clung to his side, her heart a tangle of jealousy and desperation, her diamond necklace now a heavy chain around her throat. Her eyes followed Sabrina, who spoke with Dr. Lin, her voice low but commanding respect. Nadia's confidence, once unshakable, dissolved like mist, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and resentment. She's turning them against you, she hissed, her voice sharp but unsteady. Victor's jaw clenched, his heart lurching with a mix of anger and fear. She's bluffing, he snapped, his tone harsh, but his eyes betrayed him, darting to Sabrina with a panic he couldn't hide. Nadia's heart sank, her place beside Victor suddenly fragile. She'd built her world on his success, but Sabrina's presence was a wildfire, threatening to burn it all down. Sabrina felt the heat of their stares, but her heart remained steady, a drum of quiet power. She moved to Mr. Sato, her words measured, her smile a weapon. Your reputation precedes you, he said, his tone warm but cautious, his eyes searching hers. You're more than Victor's shadow, aren't you? Sabrina's heart soared, a rush of pride washing over her. I've always been more, she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. The nod he gave was small, but it sent a thrill through her chest, a validation she'd fought for through years of rejection. Her blackness, once twisted into a flaw, was now her strength, and she wore it like armor, her every gesture a defiance of the world that had tried to break her. Victor watched, his heart a furnace of rage and doubt. He approached another investor, Ms. Carter, his voice smooth but strained. Apex is the future, he said, his smile forced. We're untouchable. Ms. Carter's eyes drifted to Sabrina, Her response curt. "We'll see what's out there," she said, her tone neutral but heavy with implication. Victor's smile faltered, his heart lurching with a fear he couldn't name. He'd planned to dominate this night, to crush Sabrina under the weight of his success, but her presence was unraveling his control. "She's nothing," he told Nadia, his voice trembling, but the words felt like a prayer, not a truth, his chest tight with a storm he couldn't quell. Nadia's fingers dug into his arm, her heart racing with panic. "Do something, Victor," she whispered, her voice low but urgent. "She's stealing your night." Her eyes burned with a mix of jealousy and desperation, her place beside him crumbling with every nod Sabrina received. She'd climbed to this height on Victor's arm, her beauty a perfect accessory, but Sabrina's quiet power was a threat she hadn't anticipated. "She's playing a game," Victor said, his voice low, but his heart betrayed him, pounding with a fear he couldn't shake. Nadia's heart sank, a realization dawning. Sabrina wasn't just a ghost from Victor's past. She was a force, and Nadia was caught in her shadow. Sabrina's heart thrummed with a mix of triumph and tension as she moved through the crowd, her every step a reclaiming of the narrative Victor had stolen. She'd faced rejection after rejection, her blackness a silent barrier in rooms full of skeptical faces. "You're Victor's ex?" one investor had sneered years ago, dismissing her. She'd proven him wrong, her brilliance turning his failing venture into a success. Now those victories fueled her, each handshake a brick in the empire she'd built with Kira. Her heart swelled with pride, but a whisper of fear lingered. What if Victor's world could still wound her? She pushed it down, Kira's words echoing. "You're unstoppable." Her ally's belief was a shield, one she carried as she faced the crowd. Victor stood frozen, his heart a battlefield of rage and fear. He'd invited Sabrina to humiliate her, but she was turning his stage against him. "She's nothing," he told Nadia again, his voice firm but trembling, his eyes locked on Sabrina. Nadia's heart pounded, her confidence shattered. "Then why are they listening to her?" she asked, her voice cutting through his bravado. Victor had no answer, his chest tight with a truth he couldn't face. Sabrina was no longer his pawn. She was a queen, and the hall was her court. Sabrina stood tall, her heart a beacon of defiance. She wasn't here to beg or break. She was here to rewrite her story, to show the world the woman Victor had tried to erase. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their eyes shifting from Victor to her, a tide turning in her favor. Her heart burned with a quiet fury, a strength that would soon shake the foundations of his empire. Sabrina Wells stood at the heart of the Global Tech Summit's grand hall, her pink off-shoulder gown glowing under the chandeliers, her long, sleek hair a cascade of quiet power. Her heart thundered, a symphony of triumph and resolve, as the crowd's eyes fixed on her, their whispers a tide turning in her favor. She'd walked into Victor's trap, his stage meant to showcase her ruin, but she'd turned it into her throne. Every nod from an investor, every glance of respect, was a brick in the empire she'd built. Novapulse, a venture born from her pain and brilliance. Her heart swelled with pride, but a flicker of sorrow lingered, a shadow of the woman who'd once loved Victor. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for truth, to reclaim the narrative he'd stolen, to show the world her blackness was not a barrier but a crown. Victor Hayes stood frozen, his heart a maelstrom of rage and despair, his once polished smile now a grimace of defeat. The hall, his kingdom, had betrayed him. Sabrina's presence had unraveled his control, her every move a dagger to his ego. He'd invited her to humiliate her, to prove his dominance, but now the investors, Dr. Lin, Mr. Sato, Miss Carter, clustered around her, their respect a silent rebuke to his arrogance. His chest heaved, his heart pounding with a fear he could no longer deny. "She's nothing," he whispered, his voice a broken prayer, but the lie crumbled as Sabrina's gaze met his, unflinching, unyielding. His heart sank, a realization crashing over him like a wave. He hadn't broken her. She'd broken him. Nadia clung to his arm, her heart a frantic knot of panic and betrayal, her diamond necklace a cold weight against her skin. Her eyes burned with a mix of fury and desperation as she watched Sabrina command the room. You said she was finished, she hissed, her voice trembling with accusation, her heart racing with the fear of losing everything she'd built on Victor's name. You lied to me. Victor's jaw clenched, his heart lurching with a mix of anger and shame. Shut up, Nadia, he snapped, his voice low but raw, his eyes darting to Sabrina with a mix of hatred and dread. Nadia's heart shattered, her confidence collapsing like a house of cards. She'd tied her fate to Victor, her beauty a perfect accessory to his power, but Sabrina's quiet strength had exposed her as a fraud. Sabrina felt the weight of their stares, but her heart remained steady, a beacon of defiance. She stepped forward, her voice clear as she addressed Dr. Lin, her words measured but laced with power. Nova Pulse is more than a venture, she said, her heart soaring with pride. It's a vision built on truth, on proving what's possible when you refuse to be erased. Dr. Lin's nod was firm, her eyes gleaming with respect. You've done more than prove it, she said, her voice warm. You've changed the game. Sabrina's heart swelled, a rush of validation washing over her. She'd faced rejection after rejection, her blackness a silent barrier in rooms full of skeptical faces. But now those barriers were crumbling, her brilliance undeniable. Victor watched, his heart a furnace of rage and despair. He pushed through the crowd, his voice loud but trembling. This is my night, he shouted, his heart pounding with desperation. Apex is the future, not her. But the crowd's eyes remained on Sabrina, their whispers a chorus of awe. Mr. Sato stepped forward, his voice calm but final. The future belongs to those who build it, he said, his gaze fixed on Sabrina. Victor's heart lurched, his empire slipping through his fingers like sand. He'd planned to crush Sabrina, to parade her as a failure, but she'd turned his stage against him, her presence a tidal wave that swept away his control. Nadia's heart raced, her desperation boiling over as she grabbed Victor's arm. Do something, she hissed, her voice sharp with panic. She's ruining us. Her eyes burned with a mix of jealousy and fear, her place beside Victor crumbling with every nod Sabrina received. Victor shook her off, his heart a storm of fury and defeat. She's nothing, he roared, but his voice cracked, his eyes locked on Sabrina with a mix of hatred and awe. Nadia's heart sank, a realization dawning. She'd bet on the wrong man. She turned away, her heels clicking sharply as she fled, her heart heavy with the weight of her own betrayal. You're finished, Victor, she whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart breaking as she abandoned him. Sabrina stood tall, her heart a drum of triumph. She wasn't here to beg or break. She was here to rewrite her story, to show the world the woman Victor had tried to erase. Her blackness, once twisted into a flaw, was now her strength, her every gesture a defiance of the world that had doubted her. Kira's voice echoed in her mind. You're unstoppable. Her ally's belief was a shield, one she carried as she faced the crowd, her heart burning with a quiet fury. She'd built Nova Pulse from the ashes of her pain, and now it was a beacon, a testament to her power. Victor staggered forward, his heart a wreckage of pride and despair. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice raw, his eyes wild with desperation. But the crowd ignored him, their applause swelling for Sabrina, their respect a final blow to his empire. His heart sank, a truth crashing over him. He'd underestimated her, and it had cost him everything. Sabrina's gaze met his, calm but unyielding, her heart steady with the weight of her victory. You thought you could bury me, she said, her voice soft but cutting. But I rose. Her words landed like a blade, severing the last threads of his control. The hall erupted in applause, the sound a tidal wave that drowned Victor's protests. Sabrina stood tall, her heart a beacon of defiance, her pink gown glowing like a flame. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for the truth, to reclaim the narrative Victor had stolen. Her blackness was her crown, her strength undeniable. Victor stood alone, his heart a ruin, his empire crumbling under the weight of her power. Sabrina's triumph echoes beyond the hall, a testament to unbreakable strength. Her story isn't just victory, it's a call to rise. What did her fire ignite in you? Share your thoughts below. Let her truth spark yours. Thank you, family, for joining this journey. Your support fuels these tales. Hit subscribe and we'll meet again, weaving stories that light the way for hope.